Then the author, rahimahullah, goes on to talk about the things that are disliked for the person that is fasting. After mentioning the things that are permissible and the things that are mustahab, he mentions the things that are disliked. And so he says, وَيُكْرَهُ ذَوْقُ الْمِلْحِ لِلصَّائِمِ. Yani, ذَوْقُ الْمِلْح, meaning tasting salt. But just what it generally means here is tasting food. Or, for example, a person is cooking food and they want to taste to see how much salt is in it or how much sugar is in it. Then it is disliked. It's disliked, but it's not haram. So that's why it says, فَإِنْ فَعَلَ ذَلِكَ وَمَجَّهُ. If he was to do that and if he were to taste it and spit it out, وَلَمْ يَصَلْ إِلَى حَلَقِهِ مِنْهُ شَيْءٌ, and none of what he tasted reached to his throat, meaning that he didn't swallow it, فَلَا شَيْءَ عَلَيْهِ, then there's nothing on him. He doesn't have to make qada. So in the case where a woman might be cooking for a lot of people and she fears that there is that she might not have the amount of sugar or the amount of salt in the food, then it is, although it's disliked, she may do it, but she has to make sure that she spits it out and rinses out her mouth and doesn't swallow any of that flavor or the sauce or whatever it is that she's making. And in that case, فَلَا شَيْءَ عَلَيْهِ, then she will not or he will not have to make any type of qada or anything like that. وَمُقَدِّمَاتُ الْجِمَاعِ مَكْرُوهَةٌ لِلصَّائِمِ. Muqaddimat al-jima' means those things that usually call to marital relations is considered dislike, and he gives examples, kal-kublati, like kissing, wal-jassati, and touching. وَالنَّذْرِ الْمُسْتَدَامِ. وَالنَّذْرِ الْمُسْتَدَامِ, to look at something, obviously with sexual intent. وَالنَّذْرِ الْمُسْتَدَامِ, for example, staring at something that arouses a person's lust. وَمُلَاعَبَتِ, and playing around, which they mean is the same thing as muqaddimat al-jima', any type of foreplay or something like that will cause some type of sexual arousal. That is disliked under the condition in ulimat as-salamatu min dhalika, if it is known that a person will not the meaning of in ulimat as-salamatu min dhalika, meaning that they know, meaning they have ilm, they're certain that those type of activities will not lead to something like ejaculation, which will nullify their fast. So basically what he's saying, the condition of the hukm being disliked is under the condition that a person knows that it's not going to cause them to ejaculate or to have pre-ejaculation fluid, which will come out, which will nullify their fast. So that's why it says in ulimat as-salamatu min dhalik wa illa, meaning if they know that these type of things can occur by engaging in these actions, haruma alayhi dhalika, then that is haram for him to do it. Then he says, lakinnahu, but in this case, in amdha, if a person was to have madhi come out, meaning pre-ejaculation fluid, min dhalika fa alayhi al-qada'u faqat, then he has to make qada. He has to make up that day of fasting. He doesn't have to make up a complete kafara. All he has to do is make up that day of fasting. But he says, وَإِنْ أَمْنَا, but if he was to ejaculate, فَعَلَيْهِ الْقَضَاءُ وَالْكَفَّارَةُ, then a person would have to make the qada and he would have to make the kafara as well, meaning he'd have to pay the penalty for breaking his fast intentionally, which is either feeding the poor, a specific measure, or fasting 2 months consecutively. And then he says وَقِيَامُ Ramadan. Then he's going to go on to mention the hadith, which is Mubarak, which is a very blessed hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said. So he says وَقِيَامُ Ramadan mustahabun muraghhabun fihi, and he says that standing for Taraweeh in Ramadan is mustahabun muraghhabun fihi, that it is a very desired virtuous act. And then he mentions the hadith, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من قام رمضان إيمانا واحتسابا غفر له ما تقدم من ذنبه. And so he says that whoever fasts the month of Ramadan with iman, meaning an iman here means believing and knowing that fasting is obligatory and having faith in it, wahtisaban, and is seeking the reward, not just fasting because it's obligatory, but hoping the reward. وَاحْتِسَابًا غُفِرَ لَهُ مَا تَقَدَّمَ مِنْ ذَنْبِهِ. Allah forgives, then his sins are forgiven. His past sins are forgiven, and the ulama mentioned that it's obviously the minor sins, not necessarily the major sins, but the minor sins. And then he says, وَيُسْتَحَبُّ الْإِنْفِرَادُ بِهِ. According to the Maliki, it is mustahab to do the Tarawih alone in one's house. إِن لَمْ تُعَطِّلِ الْمَسَاجِدِ. If it's not going to lead to the masajid being empty. Wallahu a'lam. So here he mentions that, doing the Tarawih at home is mustahab, and that's what Imam Malik used to do, but that's under the condition that it doesn't lead to the masjid being empty. So it's not that everybody should pray in their home, but for those who find more concentration in praying at home, then it's considered mustahab. It doesn't mean that it's makruh not to pray. It is makruh to pray in the congregation, which is not the point that he's getting at. What he's just saying is that it's mustahab to pray it at home, individually or with his family, under the condition in them tu'atil al-masajidu wallahu a'lam. And then he says wallahu a'lam, which is the, we've seen it in this book, the author always uses it, and it's a sign of the, the piety and the humbleness of the ulama, that they always use wallahu a'lam, and he uses it at every bab, at the end of every chapter of the book, meaning that it's not an indication that there's doubt in what he's saying, but what he's saying is true knowledge in reality comes from Allah, and Allah knows best. And so the author here finishes his book here after mentioning the hadith of the merit of Ramadan and the blessings that a person gets from it. And so the author here, his aim was just to teach some of the very basic fard kifaya. And so for those who have finished the book, then one of the adab of the student is to make dua for the author. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum.